Welcome to Good News Tucson. My name is Barney Murray, and I am here with our guest today, Dr. Ron Lester, who is the author of I'm Blind, What's Your Excuse? Welcome, Dr. Lester.
Well, thank you, sir.
We are privileged to have Dr. Lester with us today. I met him at the church that we both attend. He was there first, and my wife and I have been attending the Well Worship Center on the west side for a little less than a year now. And in meeting Dr. Lester, who is legally blind, to watch him in service, and he has preached on a number of occasions and has authored a book, and he's here to talk to us about that. So, Dr. Lester, tell us a little bit about your background and where you were born and raised, and a little bit about your childhood.
Thank you, Barney. I was born and raised in what they call Purcell, Oklahoma, and I was basically grew up on a farm just east of Rosedale, Oklahoma, which was about 25 miles from Purcell. And we grew up there until I was 14 years old. And basically, we lived at the end of the road. I thought at that time we were the poorest of the poor, because everybody in town thought we were the poor, you know. But when I look back now, I can say, hey, we were blessed, and we were sharecroppers. And Dad, he worked from way before 4 o'clock in the morning milking cows, and it was 8 or 9 o'clock a lot of times when he'd get through. But my job to begin with was basically feeding the calves at 6 and 7 years old, and every time that I was helping Mom, he would say, "Come on, Ronnie, let's go." And he'd put me to work doing something. And so I learned at a very early age to listen to him, because he had a very good belt that was very good to my posterior.
Okay. Now, was this a dairy farm, or what kind of farm was it?
We basically, for many years, had a dairy farm. And then finally, in the 50s, we went to a cow-calf operation. And we had that until 1959, when the landlord and him, my dad, basically got to that point, where Dad said, "Hey, we're not getting ahead here." And every time they'd turn around, from 51 to 56, it was very dry. We wound up putting in an irrigation well and still didn't make any money. And then in 57, it came a huge flood and washed all the crops away. And then it started impacting the farm, and the river basically just kept cutting in there, and I actually wound up losing over 100 acres out of the 400 acres. And so the landlord said, "It's time to cut my losses and get out of here." Mm-hmm. And so Dad, we wound up buying a little farm outside of Purcell, west of it, 50 acres. And Dad went to work basically at the city. He would work from usually from 7:30 till 4:30, and then when he'd get off at 5 o'clock, he would go and do welding from 5 o'clock until 10. And so, needless to say, at 14, I had to do all the chores. Mm-hmm. We had a chicken house that basically we had 5,000 head of chickens. I mean, we had a huge chicken barn.
So that's where, because in reading the book, it says something about becoming a chicken farmer after high school. Is that where it's coming from?
That's exactly where it's coming from.
Okay.
Yes.
What about your siblings? Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Well, I'm the oldest of 5. I have 2 sisters, and actually had 2 brothers. One brother, the youngest one, got killed at 35 years old in 1995. So I've got a brother that's still alive, and they all live right there together in Purcell.
They're still there?
That's right, yes.
Okay. And looking at your past, and from what I was reading, you said that from early on in your childhood, that sight always was a challenge for you. Can you kind of explain what that?
Well, I was having night vision problems, and Dad finally noticed when he bought me a bow and arrow, and I would shoot that bow and arrow, shoot the arrow down the hill or up the hill, wherever, try to go find it, and I never could find it. So Dad would walk out there, and he said, "It's right here." And finally, one day, he says, "I think we need to take you to an eye doctor." And so at 9 years old, he took me into the eye doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, he's got a little stigmatism. We're going to give him a pair of glasses." And so that helped somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
And, from there, we just basically, wore glasses. A lot of people call me four-eyed. Back then, it didn't.
I know the feeling.
Okay.
So, from 9 years old, your vision, you started to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But you went on to grow older and even went into the military.
Yes, sir.
And it wasn't until after the Vietnam War did your vision really become an issue for you.
Well, that's very interesting. I just kind of give you a little background. They checked my eyes, several times to get into the military. Nothing showed up whatsoever. But as soon as I come back from Vietnam, I tried to go out for driving out on a ramp out here at DM, the Tucson Air Force Base here. And I couldn't pass the night vision or the depth perception, so I went to the doctor after the instructor said, "Go to the doctor." And so I went. He said, "Well, you got something wrong with your eyes. I can get you out tomorrow." And I said, "Well, I'm getting married next month, and I really don't want to, jeopardize that situation." So he said, "Well, come back and see me after you get married." Well, I forgot about it. I didn't think anything about it, but I went ahead and got out a year and a half later, and I went to work at Tinker Air Force Base as a civilian, and I worked there from basically for the next till 1975.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1974, they called me in for a flight physical. I was working at what they call flight tests. We basically was doing the same thing I did in the Air Force. I was testing the F-4s out on trim pad, running them up and getting them ready for the pilot to get in the cockpit and test hop it. So anyway, the foreman came to me one day and he says, "You are supposed to have been taking a test, a medical exam, for the last 4 years. You've been out here 4 years, and somehow we have missed you." Mm-hmm. And so he said, "You have 10 minutes for an appointment at the medical place over in what they call 3001 there at Tinker." And that doctor, I go in, and the nurse, she checks my blood pressure, and it's 160 over 110. She checks it again, and it's still that temperature, that amount. So she tells the doctor, he checks it, it's still 160 over 110. He said, "Well, there's things that we can find by looking at your eyes." And so he looks at my eyes seemed like forever. And then he goes out, he tells somebody, and in 2 minutes, here he comes back with the other doctor, and he begins to look at my eyes for the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes or so. Then he steps back and he looks at me and he says, "Where do you work at?" I said, "Well, I work at Flight Test." And he looks straight in my eyes and he says, "You don't anymore?" I said, "Excuse me?" He says, "Yeah, you got something wrong with your eyes, and I'm going to send you to an eye specialist." And that's when he said, I'm going to send you to Dr. Small, which he said, I'll be calling you and letting you know where the exam will be, you know. And so when they called me on Friday and said, you got an exam on Monday, and Dr. Small looked at my eyes for, it seemed like 10, 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. He was a very good specialist. I mean, he's very, very sharp. And he just steps back and he looks at me straight in the eye, and he says, you have retinitis pigmentosa. I says, what is that? And he says, well, in lay terms, it means that you're going blind. I said, excuse me? He said, yes. He said, most likely you will be totally blind in 10 years. Well, needless to say, I was in shock. I was in a fog. I was in an anger situation. I mean, here I had spent basically 11 years doing the job that I loved, working aircraft, and they grounded me.
Yeah.
So for the next 6 months, I worked in the coffee shop making coffee. Learned how to make good coffee. But one day the boss came in and he says, I have been researching your situation. And he says, you know, I think you could retire.
Wow.
He says, you've got over 5 years at civil service. And so I prayed about it. I talked to my pastor, and he says, what have you been going to school for? You got to understand, for the last 3 years, I had been burning the candle at both ends.
Right.
I basically would go to school Tuesday and Thursday night for 6 hours, plus working full time. So I was carrying 12 hours for the last, the 3 years there. And but I did go to the doctor and got the blood pressure down. And he said, well, let's put it in and see if we can retire. And so anyway, we filled out the paperwork. I take it to personnel. The lady looked me right in the eye and she says, this will never, ever get passed. She says, you're too young and you have too much education. I said, okay, we shall see. So anyway, they put it in, and in 6 weeks it come back approved, that they approved me to go out on disability from the civil service.
Okay, that's a good place to. We're going to take a break, and we're going to hear the rest of the story now that the doctor knows that a couple of things are going on. He's losing his sight. He's almost losing his job, so to speak, and he's on the beginning of a new life that he has no clue what's going to happen. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to Good News Tucson, and we're talking with Dr. Ron Lester, the author of I'm Blind, What's Your Excuse? And we've been talking about a bit of his background, and when we left, he had just found out that he is going blind according to the military doctors and would be totally blind in 10 years according to them. And then the part of the result of that is that it sounded like they kind of encouraged you to retire. And that's about where we left off. So now you've got several decisions to make about moving forward. And your whole life is changing, where a lot of the challenges that you had overcome to all of the challenges from a childhood and your vision being an issue. And you mentioned on the break about not being able to read until fourth grade, and all of the other factors, and even to be able to get into the military, go to Vietnam, survive, and come back, only to find out that you're going blind.
Right.
I can only imagine what was going through your head. When you found the information out, did you feel like, you mentioned earlier that it made you angry. How did that manifest itself, if it did at all?
Well, I basically was 45 miles away from the house, and for the next 45 minutes to an hour on my way home, I argued with God. I said, God, I have been very faithful to you in giving up my tithes. I've been faithful in going to church every time the church door is open. I've been doing all kinds of ministry as far as the bus ministry and bringing kids to church. And I says, why is this happening to me? Why would you allow this to happen to a person that has been so faithful to you? And then the Lord began to speak to me through Psalms 23. He said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And that was when he said, you will not be in want. Because all I could visualize then was, here, I've got to live on welfare, I've got to have food stamps. My family, married, got 2 young boys. And that whole chapter, my kindergarten Sunday school teacher made us learn the 23rd Psalms, and I could quote it every verse, word for word. And every time that I said it, he would give me something to back it up and said, I'll take care of you.
Did you feel like that life as you knew it was forever changed? Exactly
right. I did several things for the next 3 years. I did. I tried the worm business. I tried raising cattle, like my dad did. Went broke in both of those. Had 150 hives of bees, and I thought that was what God wanted me to do, was to make money so I could support the ministry. But then my eyes just kept getting worse and worse, and I couldn't basically find the queen bee and take advantage of replacing her. And finally in '78, we were transporting some bees to an alfalfa field, and I was going down a hill and hit a big old bump, and the trailer almost broke in two. And the Lord spoke to me then and said, you've got to go check out the Pastoral Institute in Arnold, Missouri. I'd been talking to one of my pastors that used to pastor here, and I'd called him. He says, you need to go talk to him. And so I went in, house at 5 o'clock, told Betty to get up, get the boys ready. We're going to Arnold, Missouri. And at 6 o'clock, we get in my pickup, little Ford Courier, all 4 of us in the front seat. That's all we had. And we head for Arnold, Missouri. And I went to Pastoral Institute for a year. And then I joined the bus ministry in Del City after that 1 year. And but it totally changed my life, totally upside down.
At what point and where were you in life when your vision was to a point where you had to accept, I cannot see?
Mm-hmm. In 1984, I started having all kinds of accidents. I hit a little girl in early morning with the pickup. It was still dark, and that sent goosebumps and chills all over me. And I says, And the next week, I hit a pole at night, and then I hit a little boy that was on his bicycle while I was out on a bus route. And then from there in 1975, I had 3 major accidents with the pickup, and finally totaled it out. And then I bought a car, and the first thing I know, I total it. That's 1975 or 85 is when I finally turned the keys over to Betty and said, "You're going to have to start driving all the time."
That's amazing. And as I listened to your story from the very beginning, what's coming across is how God always had his hand on you.
Yeah.
To bring you through your childhood, your adolescence, your adulthood, the war, and to spare your life like he has. It just speaks volumes to his mercy. And not only that, but he had a master plan. And I believe that this book is a part of what he had destined for you. So going and getting your theological degree, becoming Dr. Lester, what kind of, or what was it that motivated you to write the book?
Well, what motivated me to write the book was that I was working with the blinded vets at the VA, and they have a rehab center there for the blind vets, and they have 32-bed hospital over there at the VA here in Tucson. And the more I talked to them, I did 4 years basically of working with the blind vets, and the Lord just kept speaking to me, "You've got to write a book that will help some of these people and inspire them that, hey, just because you're blind is no reason for you to just give up." Because I would see so many of these guys so depressed, and I would go in, and I would tell them, I said, "I'm totally blind, man," and they couldn't believe it. They said, "Well, how come you're so happy?" I would just tell them, it's something, it's attitude. You've got to find something to do. You got to give out, and you can't quit. And so I just started writing it. It took me 3 years really to get it in print. And I have started writing. I actually have written another book, and it's under the same title, "I'm Blind, What's Your Excuse?" And the subtitle to it is "The Day the Lights Went Out Totally." And that's when I basically, in about 2004, everything just started going totally out, and I had to start using what they call the JAWS program on the computer that would talk to me and read to me.
Okay. So as your VA experience, and what kept you from being one of the guys that you were ministering to?
Well, it was the faith in God and believing, that God has brought me this far. I used to sing this song, "Follow Me." And when you listen to the verses, I traveled down a lonely road and no one seemed to care. But I put myself in Jesus' place. What would Jesus do? And Jesus would pick you up and say, "Hey, it's not time to quit. It's time to overcome, time to press forward, and don't let anything get you down, but just keep trying and finding ways to do something and keep yourself active, no matter what your physical condition is." I got many, many things that's wrong with me besides the hearing and the eyes and a number of other things from Agent Orange from Vietnam. So
you are a living testimony of what God can do.
Amen.
So what is next for Dr. Lester? You got one book published. What's next?
Well, God just keeps telling me to write, write, write. I've already got about 6 or 8 titles of books that He wants me to write. Besides the one I just mentioned a while ago, the next one is basically, I'm blind. Do you have true grit? And I'm believing, that it will help people to understand, hey, it doesn't matter what you're having to go through. Military guys have their legs, amputated, and they overcome that. People that, wind up totally blind, just, from fragments from explosions and what have you, and instantly go blind. I mean, they've overcome it.
Right.
And that's my whole desire, is to speak to other people as much as I can, and hopefully through these books I can encourage every individual that even picks it up and just reads the front or the back cover.
Amen. That's excellent. I'm blind, what's your excuse? So it's recently published, and the book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and a number of other places. And because of Dr. Lester's experience, he has agreed to take an approach where he's going to be giving back to those who he has served by donating a part of the proceeds from the sales of the book to the Blind Veterans Association, as well as the Wounded Veterans. Dr. Lester is making himself available for speaking engagements, workshops, and seminars. And if you'd like to contact him, you can do so through his website, drronlester.com. That's www.drronlester.com. Or you can contact him via email at ronlester45@gmail.com. Or you're welcome to give him a call at 520-741-1217. Dr. Lester, we thank you for coming and visiting us. We pray that the book is a success. The message is powerful because I believe it is going to breathe life into those who have lost hope. So thanks for coming again.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate it. Thanks, Barney.
And thank you for watching Good News Tucson Magazine.